The three crew members inside of the Soyuz spacecraft, again, the departing crew from Expedition 56. And they are Drew Fojsel there on the left, a NASA astronaut, and the Expedition 56 commander, who's wrapping up his third flight into space. In the center there, Oleg Artemyev from Roskosmos, just wrapping up his second long-duration stay on board the International Space Station. And on the right there is NASA's Ricki Arnold, wrapping up his second flight, a veteran of one previous shuttle mission. The three launched back in March, earlier this year, March 21st, arriving at the station 2 days later on March 23rd. And as mentioned, they are just a little ways away from landing back in Kazakhstan after spending 197-ish days in space. All of the events so far tonight have proceeded very smoothly. Things began with the crew saying farewell and moving into the spacecraft to close the hatches. That happened a few hours ago, with the hatch closure coming on the station side, closing the second hatch at 12:06 a.m. Central Time, 1:06 a.m. Eastern Time. The three crew members moved into the spacecraft and then began getting into their Sokol launch and entry suits. They're these white spacesuits that can be pressurized in the event of any emergency and are worn during any dynamic activities while in the Soyuz spacecraft. The three Expedition 57 crew members remaining behind, as we can see in this view, Russian cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev in the far end of the camera here was actually closing that hatch. The Expedition 57 commander Alex Gerst there with the camera, and then Serena Anna-Chancellor, a NASA astronaut floating upside down there on the left side of your screen. They've remained behind, and Expedition 57 officially began when the crew undocked from the space station. Once the hatch was closed and the crew members inside the Soyuz spacecraft began getting into their suits, they conducted a series of leak checks before ultimately undocking from the International Space Station from the Poisk module at 2:57 a.m. Central Time, 3:57 a.m. Eastern Time, while the station was flying 255 statute miles over the island nation of Madagascar. They flew away slowly, executing a departure burn before also doing a fly around of the station. This was a unique activity for a Soyuz departure. This allowed NASA astronaut Drew Fojsel to get into the orbital module. That's the circular part at the very bottom of your screen there, where there's a window, and then Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev was at the controls to manually fly the vehicle around the International Space Station, allowing Fojsel to take pictures of the entire vehicle structure, something that rarely happens these days. It was a common practice during NASA's space shuttle program when the shuttle would execute a fly around of the station following its departure, but the crew able to do that this evening. Largely in anticipation of the upcoming 20th anniversary of the first Element launch, the Zarya module, which launched back in November of 1998. Will celebrate 20 years of orbit and the beginning of the International Space Station in orbit this coming November. But with a successful undocking out of the way, the crew began flying further and further away from the International Space Station and ultimately getting us to where we are now, with the next milestone coming up in just about 16.5 minutes from now when they're going to execute a deorbit burn. To give you a picture of what's coming up for these crew members, they've undocked from the International Space Station and they will execute this burn of firing of the spacecraft engines to actually bring them out of orbit. In this animation, we can see the spacecraft departs the International Space Station, flies away, and then uses the large engine on the service module, the bottom part of the Soyuz spacecraft, to fire, changing their speed by about 128 meters per second, and that just helps to reorient their orbit around the Earth for that actual landing. Following a successful deorbit burn, the modules will separate, with the top orbital and the lower service module breaking off and ultimately burning up in the Earth's atmosphere. The middle portion with the crew members on board is the descent module and uses its heat shield to survive the fiery re-entry as it passes through the atmosphere at over 17,000 miles per hour. Once it's well inside the atmosphere, the initial drogue chutes will deploy, followed by the main chute, and this is to slow the Soyuz down from a descent rate of more than 230 meters per second to only 7.2 meters per second. And once the main chute is out, coming at about 6:30 Central Time today, they'll continue down until the soft landing jets fire just about 1.5 meters above the ground, and then they will touch down. Touchdown today is scheduled to come at 6:45 a.m. Central Time, 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, they're going to be landing in Kazakhstan, just to the southeast of a town called Zhezkazgan in the central portion of the country. And here's a quick map to give you an idea where they're going to be landing. That landing site, again, to the southeast of Zhezkazgan, right there in the middle of the country is where they'll touch down. And they'll get met, as we'll see in live video soon, by a series of recovery forces, including helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, also being supported by air assets, including 2 fixed-wing aircraft, providing communications over flight and coordination to the ground forces. The large bulk of the team will arrive in these Russian Mi-8 helicopters that you can see there in the lower left corner. They will fly in from Zhezkazgan and land in the vicinity of the spacecraft, begin extracting the crew with Russian search and recovery forces, also typically setting up a medical tent to move the crew in for their initial medical checks before loading them into these helicopters and bringing them back to a town called Karaganda to the northeast, where they will move into airplanes and then fly home to their home bases, with both Drew Fojsel and Ricky Arnold destined for a trip straight back here to Houston, and Oleg Artemyev will be making his way back up to GCTC, the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Russia.
So, when is it going to be? In 13 minutes? Yes, correct. So, Moscow? Moscow? ISS? Moscow, this is Hawaii. Moscow, this is Hawaii. Go ahead. Ricky's seat is loose. Oleg, come again. What happened? Ricky's seat is loose and it's moving now. It got loose during the transfer. So, and are you saying this is Ricky? Yes. Ricky's seat got loose, so I'm trying to secure it. What seat, Oleg? Ricky's. I mean the seat liner. Okay. Okay. Well, you should call it that. The seat liner. Okay, you still have time to secure it. Yes, I caught it. And please be careful.
And the crew inside that spacecraft going to work an issue with Ricky Arnold's seat. But again, the next major milestone coming up is going to be that deorbit burn, which is scheduled to take place just under 12 minutes from now. And once that occurs, the cargo or the crew spacecraft will its orbit will be changed and it will be on a trajectory that will ultimately result in it landing back in Kazakhstan. By the time they land, they'll have spent just about 197 days in space. And during their time on board the International Space Station, they were extremely busy, overseeing the arrival of 6 different vehicles, including 2 cargo craft from SpaceX, a Russian resupply Progress ship, a Cygnus cargo craft from Northrop Grumman, the Soyuz crew vehicle from their fellow Expedition-56 crew members, Prokopiev, Gurs, and Serena Anand-Chancellor, and also most recently an HTV vehicle from JAXA. This is just some of the quick stats, assuming an on-time landing that we'll have today. Again, you can see the total time in space for all of them. They also all took part in spacewalks, Artemyev doing one, and then Fojsel and Arnold conducting 3 spacewalks, totaling 19 hours and 30 minutes. And this is just a shot from a couple of shots from those spacewalks. For Fojsel, he now has 9 in his career, placing him second amongst all U.S. spacewalkers for total time doing those spacewalks just behind Mike Lopez Alegria, and also putting him third time on the all-time list behind Alegria and Anatoly Solovyev. And for Ricky Arnold, he has 5 spacewalks in his career, a total of 32 hours and 4 minutes.
Available now. Please stand by. Faster.
And as we're just under 10 minutes away now from that deorbit burn, Ricky Arnold, former educator, was also taking part in the Year of Education on Station, an initiative over the last year that saw both him and NASA astronaut Joe Acaba, 2 former teachers, spending time on station and getting a chance to reach out and inspire thousands of students and other educators, especially with an interest in STEM and passion, answering more than 1,000 questions through 64 live connections between the space station and students and teachers on the ground, ultimately helping to stimulate interest in STEM for these students and advancing American achievements in discovery, invention, and exploration. So why don't we take a quick look at some of the work that was done over the Year of Education.
The Year of Education on Station, or YES, featured 64 downlinks.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Welcome aboard the International Space Station.
2 teachers were among the 15 astronauts on station involved in YES.
If you spin a fidget spinner in space, does it just keep spinning?
What is your favorite view from the ISS?
What's the food really like up there?
During the year, more than 1,000 questions were asked by students and teachers from 27 states, plus DC, Puerto Rico, and Canada. One downlink included an international audience and question submissions from Paraguay, Nepal, Kosovo, Madagascar, Guinea, Morocco, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan. Astronauts traveled nearly 375,000 miles during YES downlinks. That's more than 1.5 trips to the moon. Over the entire Year of Education on Station, astronauts traveled over 153 million miles. That's more than a return trip from Mars. This year, more than 175,000 students and 40,000 teachers watched education downlinks from all over the world.
Four. Okay, go.
На маневр, да?
For maneuver. Inaudible.
Again, right now we are just 7 minutes away from the planned deorbit burn. That'll be a firing of the spacecraft engines, planned to be 4 minutes, 39 seconds in duration. And by this point, the Soyuz will already be about 32 kilometers away from the International Space Station.
Yes. Go ahead. Can you hear Moscow, Hawaii? Moscow. Moscow, this is Hawaii 1, 1, 2, 3. Yes, Oleg, we read you loud and clear. So have you been able to secure yourself in your liner? Page 50, 50. I can hear you, but I did not hear Moscow. The comm is poor now. Oleg, please provide commentary of your actions. Okay, I have fastened all the straps. 5 minutes and 46 seconds remaining prior to SCAD activation. SCAD time -8 has already passed, and this is page 50-50. Hawaii, this is Moscow. command. Deactivate HESA. Page 50, you said. Correct. Do you copy? How do you read me? Hawaii. Hawaii, please provide running commentary. Ignat, we could not hear you before. 5 minutes remaining prior to SCADA activation. Attitude has been built. I can read you now. Oleg, please do not do anything else prior to SCADA activation. You will complete everything else after that. Yes, we copy that. That's clear.
And so we're about 4.5 minutes from the planned start of the deorbit burn.
You will have lots of time between SCADA TIG and module separation. Copy and understand. 4 minutes, 15 seconds to SCADA TIG.
So some of the words you're hearing right now, the TIG is the time of ignition. That's when they'll actually flip on the engines and execute the deorbit burn, planned to be just under 4 minutes and 40 seconds in duration.
Ideal, I would say. Earth is under us. Copy. Make sure you monitor GSO status. Covers open. GSO attitude. Control system readiness. Ready. Ready for SCADA TIG. Everything is for plan. S9 is Drew. Can you confirm S9 executed the yes? And we're on to prepare for monitoring SCADA burn. And then for one. Copy. Please provide us time starting at SCADA TIG -1 minute. Ignat, say again.
Я говорю, проконтролируйте по СКД -1 минута прохождение команд на подготовку режим стабил, свободный гироскоп.
SCADA TIG time -1 minute. Please confirm that the prep for SCADA TIG command has been executed. Copy, we'll do that. The 3 command. Is it executed or not? Stand by for G3 command.
Yes,
G3 confirmed. All good. Prep of stabilization mode. Standing by. 2 minutes to SCADA TIG. Attitude.
And so we're just under 2 minutes now away from that planned deorbit burn. And that's a firing of that main engine on the Soyuz spacecraft to begin taking the vehicle out of orbit. Planned to be just under 4 minutes and 40 seconds in duration.
Standing by.
Олег, при отработке двигателя, значит, импульса ведешь подробный репортаж?
Alex, please provide detailed running commentary during SCADA firing. Can you hear me okay right now? We'll give you the commentary. I have you with loud noise on the line. Stabilization mode readiness confirmed. All's good. SCADA cover open, complete. 39 seconds to SCADA TIG.
And right now we are under 30 seconds from the planned ignition of the Soyuz engine for deorbit burn.
Standing by for escadate TIG, 20 seconds.
4:30. Ожидаем включения двигателя в заданное время.
Copy, will expect the escadate TIG at the time we provided.
5 секунд до включения.
Copy, 5 seconds.
Ориентация норма.
Attitude nominal.
Есть включение.
Escadate TIG confirmed. Escadate on confirmed.
Есть набор импульса. Отработали.
And getting confirmation, the deorbit burn has begun. Again, this is planned to last 4 minutes and 39 seconds in duration, but the deorbit burn has begun.
15 seconds into escadate operation.
Так, ускорение 0.46, отлично.
Deorbit burn came right on time, 5:51 a.m. Central Time. As we can see in this ground track, the Soyuz, which is the green spacecraft on your screen right now, flying just to the southeast of South America.
Так, отлично.
Delta V 16. Nozzle pressure 12.8 on each side.
Отработали 55.
55 seconds. 24.9. direction 0.47 of nozzle pressure, around 13 on each, 84 delta V, acceleration 0.47, nozzle pressure around 13 on each, everything is excellent, 3 minutes, 15 seconds, 92 delta V, 13 on nozzles. After 30 minutes.
Everything continuing to look good with the numbers being reported here by the visiting vehicle officer in Houston. We have just about under a minute left in the deorbit burn.
0.48. I went up a little bit. On acceleration, 106 after 3 minutes and 40 seconds. 0.48 acceleration, 4 minutes even, 111 delta V. 0.48 for acceleration, nozzle pressure 13 on each end. Get ready for escadate off. 4 minutes, 15 seconds, 119, 120. Nozzle pressure 13.0 or thereabouts. Cadou parameters nominal. 4 minutes 30 seconds, 125 delta V. 0.48. Main engine cutoff command executed. КСДБО open. Confirmed. And
and confirmation the deorbit burn has ended. The engine has been cut out.
98 is the final delta V per onboard computer KS-020.
And the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston reporting numbers look good, a good burn. That means the engine fired for its expected duration, and the change in velocity, that delta V you keep hearing, was pretty much right on the money. They were looking for about 128 meters per second change, and it's almost exactly what they ended up with. So with that, the deorbit burn being complete, that means the orbit of the Soyuz spacecraft has now been altered to ultimately have it intersecting with the steppe of Kazakhstan during this orbit. So now it's going to continue to descend in altitude, eventually moving down. It's still about 250 statute miles, or a little bit less now, over the Earth's surface. It's going to continue to move down, and then in a little over 25 minutes from now, we'll be at our next milestone, which will be the module separation. That'll occur typically about 27 minutes after the deorbit burn. That'll come up at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern, and that will be the physical separation of two of the three modules from that descent middle section where the crew is residing, and they're going to land in throughout the rest of the operation. So the top orbital portion and the bottom service module will split off. They'll eventually burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, and then the center portion, the descent module, will continue its way down. That having the heat shield, the parachutes, and all the other systems required to actually land the capsule in Kazakhstan this morning.
Copy. Checking all parameters, all nominal.
Рекомендация. Расскажите нам, что все-таки с креслом произошло, с ложементом.
Why? We'd like to know what happened with the seat liner.
Рики почувствовал, что он как бы в какой-то момент заколебался, кресло заколебалось, и я видел, что он приподнимается.
Ricky thought that he felt his seat vibrate, and I thought I saw him lift up. Can you please tighten the straps? That should take care of it.
Кресло сверху, где амортизатор.
No, it's not the seat liner. It's the seat itself where the shock absorber is.
Из замка заголовник вышел, что ли, там?
Да.
At headrest? That's correct.
Давление БО падает, да?
So pressure drops.
Что сделал? Просто защелкнул, что ли, там?
So what did you do with the seat? Did you just click it? Yeah, I reached in there and clicked.
Да.
Ну, понятно. Ладно, только, Олег, сейчас больше ничего не предпринимаю, ладно?
All right, so you think it's restrained in place right now, is that correct? Yes? All right, then, Oleg, don't do anything else.
Вообще ничего. Сиди на месте и все.
About what? About anything. Just stay in your seat and do nothing.
So at this point, the crew locked securely in their seats and strapped in. Each one is in a seat inside the Soyuz spacecraft with a seat liner that before their flight gets specially molded. They actually sit in a seat mold in their suits and have it custom made for each of the crew members. That's just to ensure they have the snuggest fit possible while they're inside that Soyuz spacecraft for all of the G-forces and other forces that they're going to experience during this landing coming up. But our first major milestone of this section now down with the deorbit burn done successfully. Everything looking good from the data received in the Russian Mission Control Center over there in Koryov, and confirmed by our visiting vehicle officer here in Houston. Again, the next big milestone coming up as they continue to descend through the Earth's atmosphere is going to be that separation of the different modules. Once that occurs, they'll be at an altitude of about 87 miles or so over the Earth's surface. And this gives you kind of a breakdown of the Soyuz spacecraft, again made up of 3 primary pieces. The orbital module up at the top, which actually is used to dock with the International Space Station and provide some additional room for the crew while they're in flight. They're largely staying out of it, obviously, during today's operations, but for the ascent and the trip up to the International Space Station, especially if they're on a 2-day trip, that does provide some extra facilities and leg room for the crew members to stretch out. The descent module is where they're in today, and that's the only portion that'll survive the actual re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, weighing in at just about 2,900 kilograms. It has all of the crew's seating, also has reaction jets for controlling that re-entry, has the parachutes and life support systems necessary on board, and that's where they'll be touching down pretty soon in Kazakhstan. And then that instrumentation and service module on the bottom, having the solar arrays, batteries, avionics, and other equipment, as well as the large orbital maneuvering engines, the big one of which they just used for the deorbit burn. But both that service module and the orbital module will split off from the descent module. That's planned to take place at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern, and those 2 pieces will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere while the descent module continues through its entry. This gives you kind of a timeline of events of how this is going to take place. That braking impulse is what just occurred, that deorbit burn. The modules will separate, again at an altitude of about 87 miles over the Earth's surface, and then they'll begin the re-entry. The service module and the orbital module will burn up upon re-entry, while the Soyuz descent module makes this controlled descent. There will be some spotty erratic comm during the re-entry portion typically, especially as they enter into what's known as a plasma, so the intense heat of re-entry builds up around the spacecraft and can interfere with the communications, so it's typical to lose communication with the spacecraft during that phase. Once they are ultimately well inside the Earth's atmosphere and pass the largest G loads, they'll be exposed to about 4 to 5 Gs, so 4 to 5 times Earth's gravity during this descent. The command will be given to open the chutes with an initial drogue chute coming out to slow the vehicle down, and then the large main parachute coming in to do the heavy lifting, slowing the vehicle down to about 7.2 meters per second until touching down with the soft landing engines firing just before touchdown. And also at this point, back down. Marine vehicles to basically circle the expected landing zone, the calculated landing zone. And they'll be in position to quickly touch down and actually follow the crew module's descent under parachutes. Confirmation that they have begun to leave the airport. They'll typically form a racetrack pattern around the expected from the spacecraft. Also doing things like setting up a medical tent as well as our video views of the landing itself. So as of now, those helicopters getting confirmation that they and getting reports of very few clouds in the sky. So we're hopeful we'll get some video of the crew capsule pretty early on. But as always, we will stand by.
Earlier than 6 minutes prior to module separation.
And so right now the Soyuz spacecraft continuing to descend down. As you can see from this ground track, it's right in the center of your screen right now. It's the green vehicle. You can see there it's just about to make the pass over Africa. The white line is the current orbit of the International Space Station, but the Soyuz almost following the exact same orbit. And this current orbit is going to take it right over that landing zone in Kazakhstan. And at this point, the vehicle getting to an altitude where, again, we expect communication to be kind of in and out with the vehicle for the rest of the phases. So a very normal situation to lose comm with the spacecraft and the crew on board now until they're on the ground there in Kazakhstan. Typically, after they're through the entry interface and under parachutes, they're able to get communication set up with one of the airplanes that's going to be circling the area. There's a beacon on board the spacecraft that they're able to pick up, and then they're also at times able to set up voice communications between the recovery forces and the crew directly. But our next major milestone is going to be that separation of the modules. That's coming up at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern. So for now, we're just about 10 minutes away. For the crew on board, Drew Fojsel, Ricki Arnold, and Oleg Artemyev continuing to descend down, strapped into their seats in that center portion of the Soyuz spacecraft, well on their way down for a touchdown in Kazakhstan.
Москва, Гавайи.
Moscow, Hawaii. Pressure helmets are sealed. We're standing by. S3 is executed, and Rus in hand.
Getting a call from the Soyuz commander Oleg Artemyev. The helmets on their Sokol suits closed and sealed.
And I have a hold on the Rus handle.
Олег, по возможности контролируйте ориентацию.
Please continue to monitor your attitude, Oleg.
Ориентация норма.
Принято.
As practically possible. Copy. Attitude currently is nominal. Thank you, Oleg.
And again, we're just about 7 minutes away from the next major milestone, the module separating on the Soyuz spacecraft. And again, at this point, we're generally outside communications range with the craft, so the chatter between Oleg Artemyev and the crew on board and the Russian flight Again, we're standing by. The next major milestone going to be the separation of the modules. That'll occur at about 87 statute miles over the Earth's surface. The descent module will be separated from the orbital module on top and the service module below, which will break off and eventually burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. The descent module will continue its controlled re-entry, with the crew inside being protected from the heat of that fiery re-entry by a heat shield. And shortly after the separation of those modules, it'll begin what's known as entry interface. That's really the first time they're really beginning to feel the effects of the Earth's atmosphere. That coming right at the Kármán line, about 100 kilometers or 62 miles over the Earth's surface.
A copy.
Then following that, they'll enter into what's known as the plasma. That's when you'll go through the peak periods of heating. The crew members inside able to see the bright plasma shooting past their spacecraft through the windows on the Soyuz. Then following that activity, which will last about 5 minutes, they'll start to experience the anticipated maximum G loads, pulling about 4 to 5 Gs, or experiencing 4 to 5 times the pull of Earth's gravity during this fast descent. At that point, they'll be about 20 miles over the Earth's surface. And then once free of that, they will give the command to open the chutes. That coming at just about 35,000 feet in altitude, so they'll be right around the range of where commercial jetliners are flying around when the chutes get commanded. 2 pilot parachutes will get deployed, the second of which is going to pull out a drogue chute, which is going to do the initial slowing from a very fast 230 meters per second to a more manageable 80 meters per second. Then they'll release the main chute, which is much larger than the drogue, slowing the Soyuz down to only 7.2 meters per second.
Hawaii, Moscow. Inaudible. Standing by for separation.
And we are now standing by for module separation.
Standing by for separation.
And getting a report from the visiting vehicle officer, the modules have separated based off the telemetry that they're seeing. So again, the orbital and service modules separating from that descent module for them to ultimately burn up and allow the descent module to do its controlled re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, followed shortly thereafter by the deployment of the parachutes. First, the drogue chute, which will do its initial slowing of the vehicle. And once they get a little bit lower, the main parachute will deploy, ultimately slowing the vehicle down to just about 7.2 meters per second, and allowing some heat to dissipate from the heat shield, and then the soft landing engines firing just a little under a meter off the ground, and then the vehicle touching down. So another successful, another checkpoint pass with that module separation going right on time at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern. And then in just about 2 minutes from now, they'll begin what's known as entry interface. Now, entry interface is when they're at an altitude of about 100 kilometers or 62 miles over the Earth's surface, which is typically or widely recognized as the line between outer space and Earth's atmosphere. And then that's when the vehicle will be much more subject to the atmospheric forces on it. It has a number of orbiting maneuvering engines on board the vehicle to help orient it for this controlled re-entry down to the ground. And then shortly after passing that line, they'll be moving into the plasma stage, where again the intense heat of re-entry on that heat shield will begin to build up around the vehicle. The crew members seen outside of their windows as they begin to push through into thicker and thicker atmosphere, eventually exiting and then pulling about 4 to 5 Gs before the command of open the chutes is given. But everything continuing to go very smoothly with the vehicle, moving past and actually getting some good comm and good telemetry or live data from the vehicle itself. And again, we are well within that stage now where, again, it's very common to not have communication with the Soyuz spacecraft, especially following that module separation. But the crew members continuing to pass through the Earth's atmosphere. The team's out at the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov monitoring. So at this point, the vehicle has passed that entry interface stage. So again, they're under 62 miles away from touchdown now. And in just about 30 seconds, we'll begin to enter into that plasma stage, where that plasma is going to begin to build up. By that point, they'll already be just about 50 miles over the Earth's surface. This coming just 4 minutes after the modules have separated, 34 minutes since our deorbit burn. And they've been undocked from the station now for just about 3 hours.
Inaudible.
And so at this point, plasma is beginning to build up around that descent module with the 3 crew members inside, NASA's Drew Fojstel and Ricki Arnold, and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev, the Soyuz commander for today. They're going to continue through this, and then they're going to exit from the plasma at about 6:28 and 30 seconds or so Central Time. At that point, the crew members will be experiencing the largest expected G-load of this descent portion, pulling about 4 to 5 times Earth's gravity, which these 3 crew members have been living in microgravity for the last 197 days, so can definitely be a bit jarring to the system. But strapped in very tightly to their seats inside the descent module, continuing to fly down through the Earth's atmosphere at this point. This animation just kind of giving you a representation of what that plasma stage looks like before moving on into the lower parts of the atmosphere and then getting the parachutes open for that eventual touchdown. Here's a live view back in that Russian Mission Control Center where, again, they've been monitoring all of the night's events, working with the crew on board and conversing directly with Oleg Artemyev, who's the commander of the Soyuz spacecraft. Throughout the evening, we've heard him referred to as Hawaii. That's actually the call sign for this particular Soyuz spacecraft, chosen by Artemyev before their mission. And the flight controllers here, they're in Koryov, just outside of Moscow, also in communication with the search and recovery forces, which have mobilized down there in Kazakhstan and are already standing by on station at the expected landing zone. They're just going to be keeping an eye out, essentially, for the Soyuz spacecraft. They'll typically get a view of it under the parachutes as it descends down towards the Kazakh steppe. They'll be ready to move in on Russian Mi-8 helicopters and all-terrain vehicles almost immediately after touchdown to quickly begin getting the crew extracted from the spacecraft, after which they'll get some medical checks and then get loaded into helicopters, make their way back to an airport at a nearby city, the nearby city of Karaganda, before eventually heading back to home base. For Drew Fojsel and Ricci Arnold, they'll load onto a NASA plane along with some of the NASA personnel there to help with the recovery and make a beeline straight back here to Houston. And then for Oleg Artemyev, he'll go back with teams from the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center back to Star City, Russia. But at this point, we're about a minute and a half away from the expected exit from the plasma. Again, at which point the crew will be experiencing the largest G-force loads expected during this descent. And by that point, which will be 6:28 in about 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, they'll only be 20 miles over the Earth's surface. Again, they started off at just about 255 statute miles over the Earth's surface when they departed the International Space Station, so a pretty quick descent and a ride down.
Integral value 3.68 is the G value, and I copy loud and clear. 368 is the G load. 2 seconds. 368, it is stable, and G load is decreasing now. Integral value is 11. We're feeling just fine. SR pressure is 759. And decreasing. Pressure is decreasing. I'm sorry, pressure is stable. G load is decreasing. 2.32 is the G load. Integral value is 12. Pressure is at 759.
And so getting some performance calls there from Oleg Artemyev. So already getting calm back with the vehicle. Heard him read out the G load. .80 meters per second.
That is a ride. Wow. Shield at 34, about 3 minutes.
And we're already getting some video, and as we can see, the Soyuz spacecraft under parachutes already. That large off-gassing you can see is actually spare fuel for the reaction control thrusters being vented prior to landing. Touchdown. The spacecraft already under parachute, beginning its descent to ground at Kazakhstan.
Да, пожалуйста. Я попробую. Ага. I'll try to warn you if we hit the seats, buddy. Рики, у тебя моя палка, мой стик здесь? Спасибо. Пожалуйста. Так, принимаем. Добрый день. У нас АУС. Промах 2 секунды. Положительно.
Continuing to get this spectacular view in that spacecraft, 3 crew members, Andrew Fойстел, Ricky Arnold, and Oleg Artemyev, slowly descending to the ground there in Kazakhstan. Under the parachutes, everything going nominally or normally throughout all of the Soyuz descent activities today. It looks like the last of the hydrogen peroxide being vented out that used to power those reaction control thrusters. It's going to continue to descend under this parachute all the way down, eventually slowing to about 7.2 meters per second. Once it's just about a meter above the ground, which we may or may not see depending on where the ground camera is located, some soft landing engines will fire. It's 6 engines to slow the Soyuz's descent rate to a final 1.5 meters per second. Those will fire just off the ground about 2 seconds prior to landing. Again, landing was targeted for 6:45 a.m. Central Time. We'll see if we get an actual time. Oh, and there we see the heat shield being expelled from the vehicle as planned. The heat shield has been deployed. That actually exposes those soft landing engines, which again will fire just a little under a meter off the ground.
As pressure is decreasing. Control descent.
Already getting reports from the search and recovery forces, the crew in a good mood as they continue to fly down. As you can see, a clear day there. So getting great visibility of the capsule as it descends under parachutes.
Yes, we're watching the capsule. It's on the chute. It just jettisoned the heat shield and everything.
I have you loud and clear. How us? We're feeling just fine. In the mood to celebrate. Rafael, the pressure is decreasing.
Берег 12.5, первом, берег 2, 4.7. Падает. Как
Is decreasing.
So again, the search and recovery forces already in communication with the crew on board, reporting the crew in good health, good spirits as they continue to descend under parachutes. We should be just about 8 minutes away from landing. It was targeted to take place at 6:45 a.m. Central Time, 7:45 a.m. Eastern. Just about everything hitting right on the timeline so far today, so that's expected to stick close. But for now, Oleg Artemyev, flanked by Drew Fojsel and Ricky Arnold, continuing to descend, just moments away from touchdown in Kazakhstan.
Altitude is inaudible. Inaudible. 90. 7 6 1 0. How do you read us? We have you loud and clear. Moscow, how do you read us?
The Soyuz continuing to descend. We are just about 6 minutes away from the expected touchdown.
Inaudible. Inaudible.
And if you're just now joining us, you're getting a live view of the descent module of the Soyuz under parachute, just minutes away from touchdown there in Kazakhstan. Inside, Oleg Artemyev from Roskosmos and two NASA astronauts, Ricard Arnольд and Drew Fojstel, ready to make their way onto Earth's surface for the first time in 197 days. Should be just under 3 minutes away from expected landing.
Altitude is 600. We're feeling just fine.
Altitude is 520.
And we are just about 1 minute away from planned landing. You saw a helicopter pass by just in the background. They're circling around, waiting for the capsule to touch down. And it's going to continue to travel under this parachute until it's about 1 meter off the ground. And then you might see some dust kicked up. That's the soft landing engines firing just to do the final slowing of the spacecraft before it touches down on the ground there in Kazakhstan. That's supposed to come at 6:45 a.m. Central Time. So we'll continue to follow along. We should be seeing a landing any moment now. And touchdown. So as you can see the capsule on the ground, the parachute deflating. The capsule does appear to be on its side, which is not unusual. But at this point, we'll very quickly start to see some of the ground forces move in, both on helicopter and on all-terrain vehicle, to begin the extraction of the crew from the capsule.
Moscow Station on Space Ground 2. Congratulations.
We can see the first search and recovery forces already arriving there at the capsule. Again, the first batch of engineers and specialists from the Russian search and recovery forces going to safe the capsule and then get it ready for the extraction of the crew. In a little while, we'll typically get a camera set up a little bit closer to watch the action as the crew comes out of the capsule. And again, if you're just now joining us, the Soyuz spacecraft with the 3 intrepid explorers from Expedition 56 is on the ground. Andrew Fойстел, Ricci Arnold, and Oleg Artemьев returning after 197 days in space. It's right in the center of all of the activity you can see there as the search and recovery forces are moving in. Again, first they'll work to safe the vehicle as other forces will begin arriving on helicopters and other vehicles on the ground. And then they'll begin the process of getting the crew out. They'll move the crew into special chairs just a few feet away from the capsule, where they're able to do some initial medical checks with flight surgeons and nurses there on site. And then after those initial checks, they'll typically also erect a medical tent there on site to do some additional checks before they eventually move the crew over to their own helicopters and then fly them back to the Karaganda airport. And that dust being kicked up, typically indicative of helicopters moving into the area. And so at this point, that ground camera will typically break down and begin to move in closer to the landing zone along with the rest of the forces. So we'll stand by and hopefully get a signal back to begin seeing the crew come out of the capsule. Again, getting their first breath of fresh air in almost 200 days. But a very successful landing, pretty much hitting all of the milestones on the timeline flawlessly since departing the International Space Station just a few hours ago. Already back on the ground there in Kazakhstan. So with the crew now back on terra firma, their total mission duration coming just at about 197 days, 195 of those spent on board the International Space Station, during which they completed 3,152 orbits of planet Earth, traveling over 83.4 million statute miles. It was a very busy time as they were on board for expeditions 55 and 56, overseeing the arrival of a number of different cargo spacecraft, including 2 from SpaceX, the SpaceX Dragon, with one arriving shortly after they docked to the International Space Station, just about a week later, showing up in early April. They also oversaw the arrival of a Russian Progress resupply craft and a Cygnus cargo craft from Northrop Grumman, which was there in May. Obviously also there on board while the Soyuz MS-09 vehicle showed up, which delivered the 3 crew members still on board the International Space Station, Sergei Prokopyev, Alexander Gerst, and Serena Anand-Chancellor from NASA. And then finally the JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency HTV-7 vehicle, which is still currently docked to the International Space Station, delivering several tons of supplies and some new lithium-ion batteries bound for the external part of the station for some spacewalks that'll be coming up in October. But as far as the stats, again, with 197 days for Oleg Artemyev, that means he has 366 career days in space on his resume. And he completed 1 spacewalk along with Prokopyev, with now a total of 3 spacewalks, totaling up 20 hours and 20 minutes. For Drew Fojstel, he was the most veteran, and he commanded Expedition 56. This was his 3rd mission, having previously flown on 2 shuttle flights, with a total of 226 days on his resume now. But he also completed 3 spacewalks for a total of 9. And that actually moved him into 3rd place on the all-time spacewalking list, behind only NASA's Mike Lopez Alegria and Russian cosmonaut Anatoly Soloviev, with that total spacewalking time of 61 hours and 48 minutes. And then last but not least, Ricky Arnold, the former teacher who rounded out the year of education on station, completing his 2nd flight with a total of 210 days now spent in space. And he was alongside Fojstel for those 3 spacewalks, now having a completed career total of 5 spacewalks, totaling up 32 hours and 4 minutes. So an extremely busy time for these crew members while they were on board the International Space Station, not only completing all of those operations, but completing hundreds of different experiments on board, studying everything from ultra-cold quantum gases to flying the first commercial European facility for microgravity, as well as a number of different medical projects being undertaken on board, as well as a lot of different research from academia and the commercial market being flown under the auspices of the International Space Station's National Laboratory. So a very successful time on board and a very successful landing now for these 3 crew members, safe on the ground there in Kazakhstan.
Later, and then we can take care of the rest of the options from the ground tomorrow during the commanding. Thank you so much for your staff.
And again, a number of search and recovery vehicles are over there in Kazakhstan right now supporting the operation. There's 2 fixed-wing aircraft that serve as overflight and help coordinate all of the search and recovery forces and actually establish that communication that we were hearing with the crew as they were coming down, primarily from that AN-12 airplane, an AN-26 serving as a people mover, more or less, actually flying some of the search and recovery forces down to the staging airport earlier today. The bulk of the forces moving in on Russian Mi-8 helicopters, flying out of Zhezkazgan, just to the northwest of the landing zone today. And we'll start to see some of those in the background potentially landing once our ground camera individuals get there to the landing zone. The rest also moving in on other ATV all-terrain vehicles, as well as 4-wheeled vehicles that we saw immediately arrive at the capsule just shortly after touchdown. So all of these forces now converging to help the crew out and again get them their first breath of fresh air in about 200 days. So we'll continue to stand by, hopefully getting some more live video from the landing zone there momentarily.
And Huntsville copies. Thanks for pointing that out. We'll take a look. Thank you. Hans was with you on 2. Go ahead. Hans for copies all. Thanks. Thanks again, Alex.
This is Mission Control Houston. Again, we're continuing to stand by for resumption of the video from the landing zone there. But fortunately for us, Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius is there with the search and recovery forces, having just flown in on one of those Mi-8 helicopters. And Rob, and actually it looks like we're just starting to get video from the landing zone, but if you can tell us how things are looking, how are all the teams situated right now around the capsule?
Dan, good morning to you and our audience. Under a brilliant sun, as brilliant as any early fall aurora could possibly be, the Soyuz MS-08 is home, standing right next to it as the extraction process is underway. I'm not sure if you're actually getting video at this moment or not. The Soyuz landed on its side, the top hatch has been opened, and one by one the crew members will be extracted to be placed in the familiar traditional reclining chairs to get their land legs back a bit and to get their equilibrium squared away a bit before they're brought into a nearby inflatable medical tent. This was such an extraordinary landing. We were at altitude of about 10,000 feet and followed the Soyuz all the way down to touchdown for about a 7-minute period. It was spectacular. Our helicopter, the media helicopter, was right on top of the Soyuz. We saw it very clearly as the soft landing engines fired and the Soyuz ended its 197-day mission. So one by one, the crew members will be extracted here momentarily. We expect the Soyuz commander, Oleg Artemyev, in the center seat of this descent module to be brought out first, followed by Drew Foystel and Ricky Arnold, who are flanking him as they were for launch 197 days ago. They will be brought into the medical tent for early medical evaluations before they are placed in individual helicopters to be flown 2 hours to the northeast of here to the town of Karaganda, where we began to stage landing operations very early this morning. Artemyev is now out. He's being helped by search and recovery personnel. He'll be placed in the center seat that you'll be seeing hopefully here in a minute. And then we'll get the 2 American astronauts, Drew Foystel, the Expedition-56 commander, and Ricky Arnold, his flight engineer, out of the Soyuz. Ricky Arnold completing a year of education on station with just a spectacular, breathtaking touchdown.
And Rob, we actually are getting video now, but thanks for that description so far. We can see Artemyev in the seat. It's looking pretty nice out there. How's the weather holding up, and how was the ride out?
The ride out was smooth as silk, Dan. We pre-staged an Antonov fixed-wing aircraft early this morning from Karaganda to the remote town of Jezkazgan to the northwest of the landing site, and then we boarded our helicopters and took off for the landing zone, about a 35-minute helicopter ride that you're very familiar with. And as I said, we were so close to the Soyuz, it was almost surrealistic, landing only about 3 minutes after the Soyuz itself touched down. And then we walked about, I would say 200 yards from our helicopter to the scene that you're witnessing right now. There's almost no wind out here. You couldn't ask for a more ideal day for early October. It was a bit chilly overnight in the early morning hours, but that chill yielded to bright sunshine. I mean, there is not a cloud in the sky to greet home these 3 Expedition-56 crew members.
And so we can see Oleg Artemyev getting handed a couple of different items now, but as you said, it looks like they're going to be getting these initial medical checks. Is there anything else on the schedule for these crew members there at the landing zone before they make their way back to Karaganda?
I'm over on the side closest to the Soyuz capsule where Ricky Arnold will be placed in his chair. So we'll be seeing both him and Drew Foystel extracted from the spacecraft momentarily. As usual, the usual NASA contingent of support personnel embedded with the Russian search and recovery forces, as they have been all week. Chad Rowe, the Director of Human Spaceflight Programs in Russia, Dan Hartman, the Deputy ISS Program Manager. We have a covey of NASA and Russian flight surgeons and nurses, and of course the amazing job by the Russian search and recovery forces. It's just extraordinary, as it is every time, that we're on the scene literally minutes after the Soyuz lands, which would suggest a bullseye pinpoint landing for these three crew members.
Well, Rob, we actually had some pretty spectacular views of the capsule ourselves. Not nearly as spectacular as I'm sure you had, but able to see the hydrogen peroxide venting and actually getting to see the heat shield get jettisoned from the vehicle. So the weather certainly seems to be cooperating. Any other thoughts as we continue to stand by to watch our NASA crew members make their way out for their first breath of fresh air in about 200 days?
Yeah, we'll hang with you here, Dan, until we get the crew members in their chairs. The other helicopters that are part of the Russian search and recovery contingent are landing in sequential fashion, as they always do. I was fortunate enough to be on the media helicopter today. It's a very dusty day because the conditions have been quite dry here on the southern steppe of Kazakhstan, and I'm looking back about 100 yards away from me, and this one helicopter that's about to land is kicking up a dust storm that would make a similar dust storm in the southwestern desert pale by comparison. But a very methodical process to extract the crew members, as they will have an opportunity for some initial medical tests in their reclining chairs before they're brought into the medical tent that is being erected nearby for early field testing, as they call it, to collect very valuable data that will be used in future long-duration space flights as the months and years wear on here.
And Rob, looks like everything's kind of gone by the book. So again, the plan still to move them back to Karaganda for the flights home, or has there been any deviation there?
Yeah, we'll be returning to Karaganda by helicopter, 10 Russian Mi-8 helicopters, 3 of which will house the individual crew members. We'll be arriving back in Karaganda in darkness, actually, since we're only about an hour away from sunset or so. At that point, it'll be a very interesting turnaround, as will be the case again in December, with just a week between landing and launch. Today was a day basically of rest for Alexei Ovchinin and Nick Hague down at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Tomorrow they'll climb aboard their Soyuz vehicle, the MS-10, for a final dress rehearsal fit check and other pre-launch activities that will set the stage for launch 1 week from today at 2:40 p.m. Kazakhstan time, Baikonur time, 3:40 in the morning Central time. The second of the crew members now being extracted. We'll see who that is here in a moment. And this should be, I believe, should be Drew Fojstel. Yes, indeed, Drew Fojstel, out of the Soyuz MS-08, being brought to his chair, and Ricky Arnold will follow in short order here.
All right, and Drew out. Drew, again, the commander of Expedition 56, just wrapping up his third flight. Veteran previously of 2 space shuttle missions. So good to see him out of the capsule. So 2 down, 1 more to go. And again, it looks like the doctors and nurses moving in there. What exactly are they doing with the crew members right out of the chairs, Rob?
Taking some initial tests of their blood pressure and some other very, very preliminary medical tests. Basically, this is very routine. There's nothing out of the ordinary about these first tests to basically get initial biomedical data. More comprehensive data will be acquired once the crew members get into their medical tent a short time from now. But this is designed so that the nurses and the flight surgeons can ensure that the crew members are stable and responding to their first gravity in 6.
Oleg, look here. Welcome back.
All right, and again, 2 of the crew members out. Looks like Oleg's been handed quite a bit of fruit, actually. I think I see a cantaloupe and a few other items. Again, he's in the center there, the Soyuz commander throughout. And Rob, I don't know if you were able to watch it at this point or if you were in the air, but he actually piloted the fly-around of the International Space Station manually, executing a pretty stunning maneuver that we were able to see, and enabling Drew Fojstel, the outgoing Expedition 56 commander, to gather some photos for the upcoming 20th anniversary, which I know everybody very excited to mark that occasion coming up in November.
Question: do the crew members communicate in
Artemyev is actually talking to a Roskosmos television crew that's here on the scene. He's actually holding a giant cantaloupe and a giant squash that were handed to him by some of the search and recovery support personnel. Right behind him is a giant flag of the city of Baikonur, which is where Artemyev is originally from, he having launched 197 days ago from his native soil back at the Cosmodrome, which is about 410 kilometers to the southwest of where we are at this moment.
And we're starting to see some more activity over by the capsule. I believe it's just Ricky Arnold still set to come out.
And Dan, if you're with me, Artemyev is taking a giant bite out of a carrot, a huge carrot, in fact, that was also part of the complement of fresh vegetables that he had actually requested greet him on his return to Earth. Artemyev completing his second long-duration mission aboard the International Space Station.
I like the look of everybody here.
And yes, Rob, we are still with you, and we actually just got eventually coming home.
And then we're probably just a moment or two away from Arnold being extracted from the vehicle.
And Rob, if you could remind the viewers what the seating configuration was inside that Soyuz spacecraft during the descent.
Yeah, the seating configuration was Artemyev, which is always the case of the Russian Soyuz commander, in the center seat. He was flanked to his left by board engineer number 1, Drew Fojstel, the Expedition 56 commander, who handed over command of the space station less than 24 hours ago to Alexander Gerst of the European Space Agency. And on Artemyev's right was Ricky Arnold, board engineer number 2, same configuration as was the case back in late March when the trio launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. I'm just continuously struck, Dan, and if I'm repetitive, so be it, but I'm just struck by how amazing the pinpoint touchdown, almost to the second, calculated by RSC Energia and the Math Modeling Center, the ballistics folks who calculate the descent of the Soyuz, taking into account atmospheric and meteorological conditions, making updates all the way around, and how precise the Soyuz gently came to Earth under its large orange and white parachute that is lying supine not far from here. The very, very slight breeze that has now developed here on the steppe of Kazakhstan, accentuating what a perfect day this is, and Ricky Arnold now out of the Soyuz MS-08, all three crew members now out of their spacecraft.
And Ricky just now coming into view for all of our viewers. We can see him getting lowered down in the chair. The third and final crew member out of that Soyuz spacecraft. A big smile already coming from Ricky, again, who just wrapped up his second space flight, having previously flown on shuttle mission STS-119. Ricky, again, also very involved, as Rob was as well, in that year of education on station.
Dan, you may be, I don't know if you're getting a clear view of Drew Fojstel, but he's holding up the sign that he has been famous for during his time on orbit, basically going back to Hawaiian tradition. The three crew members looking very hale and hearty. In a circumference all around us here are flags that were planted within seconds of touchdown. Not just the flag of the city of Baikonur, but Roskosmos, Russia, RSC Energia, and last but not least, the Search and Recovery Forces, the civilian agency called Rosaviatsa.
And we're getting a great shot right now of Drew Fojstel, the Expedition 56 commander, just next to him. The NASA flight surgeon, Joe Schmid. Now back over to Ricky Arnold. As you said, all the crew members looking hale and hearty, getting big smiles. Great to see them back on Earth after almost 200 days. And so the specialists working to remove that comm cap from Oleg Artemyev. Again, the three crew members are going to be in these chairs. Rob, can you see if the medical tent has already been set up?
Ricky Arnold just acknowledged our presence here at the landing site with a big smile. Again, undergoing a very, very preliminary and routine medical test.
About fighting the elements, but as you said, it's actually pretty close to sunset there, so I imagine they'll be moving the crew soon to the medical tent. Have you been able to spot if that's already been set up near the landing site?
Yeah, Dan, they're not going to waste a lot of time here before they get the crew in the medical tent for their field testing. Clearly, we'll be flying back to Karaganda in darkness, but the whole idea here is to try to get everybody back into Karaganda and to have them split up with the two NASA crew members boarding a a NASA Gulfstream jet that flew in from Ellington Field in Houston, and then to have Oleg Artemyev fly on the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft back to Chkalovsky Airfield just outside of Star City, Russia, base on that aircraft heading back to the outskirts of Moscow just a few hours from now. Oh, beautiful. It's just beautiful. Ricky, how was the ride down?
Oh, 119.
Second measurement, 119, 119, 72.
Quite a way to wrap up your year of education, eh? Ricky Arnold in great spirits, broad smile, describing, you probably couldn't pick it up, but describing the ride down, how while they were still in VHF voice communication with Alex Gerst on board the International Space Station, he was providing geographic location information for the crew on board the Soyuz as they passed beyond one landmark to another during their descent back to Earth following the deorbit burn that occurred some hour and 40 minutes ago. They're now raising Oleg Artemyev up, so the process of bringing the crew into the nearby medical tent is about to get underway here, Dan.
Yep, we see Artemyev on the move. Also catching our first sighting of NASA photographer Bill Ingalls there. And it looks like they brought Artemyev over to the capsule first. I think he's signing it with some chalk.
Signing his name to the capsule, Dan. This has become somewhat of a tradition, assuming the crew members are feeling up to it, for the Soyuz commander to sign his capsule. I'm looking into the sun here. The inflatable medical tent is up, ready to accept these three crew members for a more comprehensive medical test that will take about an hour or so before the crew members are loaded into their respective helicopters for the ride back to Karaganda. It's about a 2-hour, 15-minute helicopter flight. Applause from the crowd here as Artemyev is being carried to the medical tent.
And so Artemyev being carried now, he actually wrote Spasiba in Cyrillic, the Russian word for thanks, and then signed his name. But yeah, Rob, we're getting the camera following Artemyev as he's carried, and we're really getting a good look now at just the volume of people that are there at the landing zone today.
And here comes Ricky Arnold, right behind Fojstel, heading to the medical tent. Everything proceeding very quickly and very smoothly here at the landing site, Dan.
Ну-ка отсюда. Подрос, в прошлый раз
One other note as you continue to watch this, Dan, I hope you're still getting video. Lined up one after the other right alongside the medical tent are all-terrain vehicles. This is very customary for every Soyuz landing. These all-terrain vehicles will be in play to bring each of the three crew members. Each crew member has their own ATV that will bring them to their respective helicopters so that they can nestle in and get comfortable for the 2-hour-plus ride back to Karaganda.
Copy that, Rob, and we just transferred to some more video of the capsule, so please do let us know once the crew is in that medical tent for their checkouts. And we just got back, and we can see Drew Fojsel making his way in, and then Ricky Arnold bringing up the rear there right behind him.
Right, and as we speak, they are now inside the medical tent where they'll get out of their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits into more comfortable clothing, and as we mentioned, undergo the first battery of routine post-landing medical tests so that valuable data can be collected, including that field testing that is ongoing about the body's reaction to long duration exposure to weightlessness.
All right, well, with the crew now in the medical tent, Rob, I do want to thank you for calling in and giving us that play-by-play, especially as we were waiting to get that video. I greatly appreciate it as always, and I know your time is not done over there in Kazakhstan, so safe travels back to Moscow and then down to Baikonur for launch next week, and we'll be talking to you very soon.
Okay, Dan, thanks for hanging in with us here as we describe the scene. Again, let me just repeat, just a pinpoint touchdown for the Soyuz MS-08, wrapping up its multi-million-mile mission. All three crew members appearing in very good shape as they begin the process of undergoing medical exams. That is the precursor to their flight and our flight, actually, back to Karaganda as the post-landing operations continue. So we'll sign off here from the southern steppe of Kazakhstan. Now back to you, Dan, at Mission Control in Houston.
And again, that was NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius there on the scene with the search and recovery forces. At this point, getting a look back at the capsule. It did land on its side, but that is customary. Sometimes it will be on its side, sometimes upright, and you can see where Oleg Artemyev signed the capsule, writing spasiba, the Russian word for thank you, and then signing his name. But the crew members now inside the medical tent. Again, they're going to be undergoing those initial medical checks, making their way onto helicopters back to an airport about 2 hours away, loading up onto airplanes, and then heading back to home base. And for Drew Fojsel and Ricky Arnold, that's going to mean right back here to Houston, Texas. And for Oleg Artemyev, that's going to be up to Star City, Russia, to the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. And so for now, with the crew in the medical tent, we're going to stand by for a little bit while longer, as we will sometimes get some replays from cameras that were on those helicopters, potentially showing some more views of the Soyuz spacecraft as it was descending under those parachutes. But again, just to recap, the crew members on the ground, they landed safely at 6:44 a.m. Central Time, 7:44 a.m. Eastern. touching down just a few hours, a little over 3.5 hours after undocking from the International Space Station. Their landing brings their mission to a close, spending 197 days in space, 195 of those on board the International Space Station. The 3 crew members, all veterans of previous space flights. Drew Fojsel wrapping up his 3rd, Artemyev his 2nd, and Ricky Arnold his 2nd. But for now, we will just stand by for a little while longer and see if we can get those replays, get some more spectacular views of the capsule in addition to the one that we already had during the live coverage. And so as soon as we get a word on those, we will update you. But for now, continuing to stand by from here in Mission Control Houston. This is Mission Control Houston again. We're just standing by to see if we can get some replays from some of the other camera assets that were there at the landing zone. See if we can get some views from the helicopters that were surrounding the capsule as it was descending under those parachutes, and potentially some additional replays from ground-based cameras. For now, though, the crew is in the medical tent there at the landing zone. They'll be in there for some additional medical checks just to make sure the crew's in good shape and give them some time to kind of stabilize as that transition from a microgravity environment back to Earth's gravity can be a little jarring for the system, so this just gives them some time to acclimate before they're loaded into helicopters and then flown about 2 hours to the northeast to the town of Karaganda, where they'll load up onto airplanes and then make their way back to home base. But again, that wrapped up 197 days in space. For one of those crew members, Ricky Arnold, a former teacher, his return also wrapping up the year of education on station, or YES. That took place during the expeditions of not only Ricky Arnold, but also his fellow former teacher and former expedition crew member Joe Akaba. The two astronauts used their time to reach out and talk with thousands of students and educators and live calls from space down to the ground, answering more than 1,000 questions in 64 different live connections, which is actually 5 times the number of these types of calls we do in an average year. The ultimate objective of that, just to help educators get kids excited in the STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, and math, ultimately looking to advance all of our achievements here in America in discovery, invention, and exploration, to get students excited, to inspire them to pursue careers in those different STEM fields. So Arnold returning, wrapping up that year of education. Along with those live downlinks, they did a number of recorded demonstrations, which were called STEMonstrations, which you can always find online still at nasa.gov/STEM on station. And those Earth to Space calls don't end with the end of the year of education on station. They will still occur. So if you want to see how you could get involved with the International Space Station in your classroom, or see some of their lesson plans or those different experiments that they did on board, including some of the experiments planned during the Challenger mission when the first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe, was set to fly. You can always go to that website, nasa.gov/STEM on station.